Everybody's ready for a wonderful morning of stories and storytellers and authors and lots of love in the room.
Yeah.
Anne Izard. Anne Izard was born in 1916 in North Carolina. She began her career at New York Public Library. It was when she worked there that she used her vacation time to do volunteer storytelling at the Herald Tribune Fresh Air Camps and soon recognized the power of story for bonding with her young audience. From then on, storytelling was a significant part of her professional and personal life. She later worked as the children's librarian in Westchester County. She became the head of the children's department for the Westchester Library System. For those of you that don't know, Westchester Library System is the core of the 38 libraries in the county. The Westchester Library Association are our sponsors for our award. As an early member of the National Association of Preservation and Perpetuation of Storytelling, now known as the National Storytelling Network, Anne founded the Westchester Storytellers Guild for volunteer storytellers in the mid-70s, encouraging others to develop and share their craft. Organizing annual conferences, she brought fledgling storytellers who later became prominent storytellers nationally. She brought them to Westchester County. They went out into the world as Anne's kids. As a result of the number of children and adults who've listened to stories that were somehow or another set up by Anne Izard, through her students, her successors, her colleagues, Westchester became a hub for storytelling. To this day, we have the Rise Storytellers Guild. We participate in Tellabration annually in some of the libraries in the county, and we try to keep storytelling alive. After her retirement from the Westchester Library System in 1976, Anne focused almost solely on storytelling. She was a featured teller at the 1984 National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro. The remainder of her life, she told stories to adults and to children. She continued to persevere that stories and art and the oral tradition should be continued, should be maintained, and should be celebrated. So that is my introduction to the event. On that note, I'm going to introduce Carol Birch.
Well, hi there, and good morning. Oh, now you did all turn off your phones, didn't you? Or at least you took, okay, please. All right, thank you. Okay. Melissa Heckler, who is wise beyond her years, and I put our heads together. Yes, really. We put our heads together to think about how to best offer a context for this year's wonderful Anne Izard Award recipients. We are here to celebrate 13 authors, their words, their images, their singular points of view, and their glorious stories. We're here to celebrate 8 publishers, innumerable librarians, teachers, and storytellers, but 2 storytellers in particular. You just heard about Anne Izard. Anne Izard is the librarian for whom the award is named. But you'll see that it's a baker's dozen. And the baker's dozen is because that honors Augusta Baker. Augusta Baker was a general in the army of librarians who changed children's book publishing in the 1960s across our nation. And so we honor her by having a baker's dozen of books. Here are stories to inspire, stories to awaken our empathy and deepen our resistance to distortion right from the beginning. Here are stories that preserve and perpetuate ancient wisdom which acts as a safety valve in an overheated world on so many levels. Most importantly, these stories let us know the other as friend and even as family. Stories present us with a bounty in their diversity. Stories uniquely place us within the duality of teacher as learner and learner as teacher. Here is a wealth of folklore, biography, and historical fiction that moves the past right into the theater of the now. When stories are told and retold in different places, to different audiences, in different times, they become sticky with new meanings for both the storyteller and the story listener. That is Melissa's idea, and I think it's just brilliant. She's had two tremendously brilliant ideas in her life that I know about in regard to storytelling. That stickiness business is one of them, and the other is that stories act as an opposable thumb culturally. I do not know why that is not just across the world. Because stories let us take an experience and pick it up and turn it around. I just think I will always be grateful that I was there when you thought of that. Most of all, today, we as a committee are here to celebrate you, the people in this library room, and those of you who are across the world virtually speaking. A special shout out to Marianne McShane, who used to be my boss here in Westchester. Yes. She's come a long way. But it's time. So let the wild rumpus begin. And is there a better way to begin an event like this than with a story? So Angela Caldarello will come up and tell us a story. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So happy to see you all here. So the first book that we will be mentioning of our Baker's Dozen is The Christmas Feast by Natalie Dargent. Now, I don't want it to fall over and scare me. Natalie couldn't be with us this morning because she's horseback riding in Spain. But she sends her regards and she sends her thanks. And she asked me to share her wonderful story with all of you. And it's my honor and delight to do so. The Christmas Feast. One year, Weasel, Fox, and Wolf decided to treat themselves to a Christmas feast. Now, it was Fox's job to steal the turkey. And since he was clever, he decided to go early to get the best looking one. But the adventure became complicated once he returned to their burrow. "Oh, what a mess it is in here," said Turkey, barely out of the bag that Fox stuffed her into. "Didn't you learn to clean up your den before inviting a girl over?" "You're not my guest," said Fox. "You're my Christmas feast." "Well, that's even more reason to clean up. A Christmas feast is a big thing. You have to put some thought into it, some care into it. First of all, you have to clean up this mess and let some fresh air in. I can't stand clutter." And Turkey perched on a chair to overlook the cleaning and supervise. Well, grudgingly, Fox began to clean. He really didn't want to, but this Christmas feast was quite sure of herself. And so later on, when Wolf and Weasel returned to the den, it was spotless, and they were even asked to clean their paws before they came in. And when they saw Turkey, they started cheering. "Isn't it time for dinner?" Turkey interrupted. "I'm hungry. What did you make?" But Weasel and Wolf assured Turkey that they had no intention of cooking, except perhaps to turn her into pate. Turkey scolded them sternly. Obviously, she had to be fattened up before the feast. Good grief! Everybody knows that. Was this their first Christmas? Was this their first feast? Ashamed of their ignorance, the three friends held their heads down, and then they followed Turkey's, Turkey's orders to the letter. So Wolf went out to gather sprouts, and Weasel went out to search for mushrooms, and Fox fished for frogs. Now, since none of the hosts knew how to cook, Turkey cooked a frog and sprout stew with pureed mushrooms. Everyone ate dinner and enjoyed it. And then after dinner, they played cards. And since Turkey cheated better than the rest of them, she won every hand. The friends had a lovely evening, the best that they had had in a very long time. And when it was time to go to sleep, the three of them did not have to argue who would sleep in the easy chair. It was only fair to give it to Turkey, as she herself pointed out. The three of them just slept anywhere they found room after brushing their fangs, as they had been asked to do. Now, Turkey woke them up very early the next morning. She was hungry again, and they went out searching for food, and Turkey cooked breakfast with what they brought back. And for the rest of the day and the days that followed, the three of them were not alone on their own for 1 minute. Turkey was very demanding, even between meals. She needed holly to weave into wreaths. She needed a Christmas tree to decorate, and she needed bunches of mistletoe to put all over the ceiling. And the friends even had to clean out the chimney because Turkey was very sensitive to the cold. Now, as Christmas approached, the three friends grudgingly washed their paws before they sat down to dinner. But they had begun to like all those home-cooked meals. Now, they still didn't win at cards, but they knew how to make gingerbread and how to make garlands. Now, on Christmas Eve, Turkey asked a very important question. How were they going to cook her? Were they going to roast her and serve her with gravy or stuff her with herbs? I would like to be flambéed, she requested, but the recipe is very, very difficult. Do you think you can manage it? Well, the three friends let out an embarrassed cough. They hadn't thought about it. And so they postponed the discussion to the next day. The three of them had no wish for their dear friend to be roasted or stuffed or flambéed. But what could they do? They didn't have a wink of sleep the whole night. Luckily, the next day, Turkey came up with a solution. Dear friends, she said, I can see that you are afraid if you kill me too soon, you will go hungry. Well, why don't you fatten me up for another year? There will always be time to eat me next Christmas, and I will be fatter, and the feast will be bigger. Well, that proposal was accepted unanimously. And the Christmas feast was cooked by Turkey herself. Now, once this decision was made, it was renewed Christmas after Christmas. And right now in the forest, no one could find a happier, more joyful burrow or 3 friends fatter and happier than wolf, fox, weasel, and turkey. Thank you. And that's the Christmas piece by Natalie Darjon. And I just, even though she's not here to hear me, I just want to say thank you, Natalie. I love this.
Look, I'm back. Kevin Crossley Holland. He's an author, he's a poet, he's a folklorist, he's a storyteller extraordinaire, and he's written this book, In Between Worlds, Folk Tales of Britain and Ireland. His themes include magic and wonder, adventure and legends, fairies and little people, power, passion and love, wits, tricks and laughter, and ghosts. Kevin's stories are not once upon a time. They're ancient, they're rich, they're eerie, and they're magical. And Kevin is kind enough to join us via Zoom from England today. So I'm going to turn this over to Kevin.
She didn't like it at all when her father had to go down to London, and for the first time, she had to sleep alone in the old house. She went up to her bedroom early, she turned the key and locked the door, she latched the windows and drew the curtains. Then she peered into her wardrobe and pulled open the bottom drawer of her clothes press. She got down on her knees and she looked under her bed. She undressed. She put on her nightdress. She pulled back the heavy linen cover and climbed into bed, not to read, but to try and sleep. She wanted to sleep as soon as she could. She reached out and turned off the lamp. "That's good," said a little voice. "Now he's safely locked in for the night." Good morning to you all. Good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are. From east to west coast, I'm privileged to be with you, and I heard sleeping on the top half of a bunk bed with my sister sleeping on the bottom half, story after story, night after night, from my father, who accompanied himself on a Welsh harp. And I gathered as I grew up that there were more than 10,000 British folk tales, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, Danish, English, said Kipling, to which one could add Celtic. And I began to retell them and work them into my own stories, poetry, and novels. But what interested me was the way in which the end of the 18th century and through the 19th century, the collection of folk tales became not just a hobby, but a science through the whole of Europe and then beyond. The Grimm brothers were in the forefront in that. And I began to think that although people take stories and disembody them almost and press them to their own use, we needed to preserve how the first people who heard them understood them, irrespective of the fact that many of them have a lamentable lack of feminism, and some are socially almost unacceptable. But it was important to understand those as the building blocks from which we take our stories. And so this book, Between Worlds, has notes at the end, a few of them, to explain where the stories come from, and in a few instances, what I did with them. The stories of folktale, the language of folktale, is always forthright. There's a lot of direct speech. It's vivid, it's quick. And these are the stories of everyday folk, their ambitions, their frustrations, their absurdities, their disappointments, their joys. And you must understand, as you all know, though, that these stories were first oral, where they were shared by a family, by a household, by a community. And so one's looking for language that's not ornate or embellished, but direct, forthright, full of verve and colour and edge. So I selected not the usual stories, but the ones I simply thought were the best. Magic stories, stories of love, stories of ghosts, stories of legends, where there was a little historical pearl at the very middle of them. And that's the nature of Between Worlds. And here's a story from it. It's called Why Everyone Should Be Able to Tell a Story. It was cold and clammy, and I realized I'd never get back to our holiday cottage before dark. But as I walked along the riverbank, I saw a light coming towards me. No, the mist was playing tricks. The light wasn't moving, I was moving. It was a little stone cottage. I'm lost, I told the old man who opened the door. He had strange green eyes. I only got one bed, the old man said in a light, lilting voice, but I'll tell you what, you tell me a story and you can sleep by the fire. Well, my head went empty. I couldn't think of a thing. You know how it is. The old man's green eyes flickered. Oh, pity, he said. I could have done with a story. Still, you can stay if you want. He waved towards the far corner of the room. Your companion won't be bothering you. Good night to you now. My companion was a sheep. He was dead as a dumpster. I sat by the fire, and as soon as I closed my eyes, I heard the cottage door creak. Then I saw two men creep into the room, cross to the corner, and pick up the dead sheep. Well, I followed them. Of course I did. I didn't want the poor old man thinking I'd rustled his dead sheep. The two men hurried along the riverbank. Then one of them looked back over his shoulder. We're being followed, he exclaimed. Come on, let's get him. At once the two men dropped the sheep, flop. They ran back towards me, and me, I took off to the cottage, fast as a hare. You know what? I missed my footing and tripped into the water, right down, right under, and then right up. In the misty dark, I caught hold of a slimy tree root, and the two thieves stood on the bank and shied stones on me like I was a coconut. Come on, I heard one say, we're wasting our time. And with that, they went back along the riverbank to the dead sheep. I pulled at the rope, but my feet slipped on the river mud. I pulled again, but my hands slipped on the slimy root. I pulled a third time, and that's when I woke up. Next morning, the first thing the old man said was, "Well, I fancy you've got a story now." "I have," I exclaimed. "I have, the moment I closed my eyes." The old man waved his right hand and his green eyes flickered. "I know," he said in his lilting voice, "that dream, I gave it to you. Everyone needs to be able to tell a story. Thank you."
Well, Rasheen Rie seems to not be on the Zoom link, so we will pray that she's not cursing the internet and not ill or anything like that, and that just she's doing something more fun, I guess. She wrote the book Bahar the Lucky. She wrote it and she illustrated it. I thought you'd like to know something about her. She was born in Khorramshahr, Iran, and left when she was just a year old, escaping when Iraq invaded. She received a PhD in illustration and an MFA in graphic design from Al-Azhar University in Tehran. And she's internationally recognized. I don't know why she doesn't have another book on her list, because she's published 80 books. 80 books, and we've seen one. Aha. Publishers, take note. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, she's also created illustrations for the New York Times. And she was named the 2017 Maurice Sendak Fellow. No small thing. And winner of the New Horizon Award at the Bologna Book Fair. She's accomplished, all right? And she's a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators and lives in Washington, D.C. Rasheen means brook in Farsi, the smallest stream. But the smallest stream is sometimes mighty, as she is. She has written a suspenseful and tellable picture book that weaves the siren songs of easy money and that pool of power. Bahar, the main character, earns a little money as an artist, yet she is weaving priceless rugs of great beauty. But in a series of madcap misadventures, she receives the wealth and the favor of a capricious king. You know what it's like when you have a capricious ruler. Her life and her family fortune are transformed. Suddenly, they are wealthy, but she's also being asked to do things. Who knows how to do them? It's such a cost. Her storytelling captures Bahar's move from that dizzying swoosh of notoriety back to her center as an artist. So of course, you've got the swoosh amplified by the pictures, but we don't honor pictures. We honor the text, and the text is nonetheless glorious. 2 of the 40 thieves peeked through the window. They came in and bowed humbly after she had pulled off a trick before her, oh, great master of fortune telling. That's what she became as far as the capricious king was concerned. You have discovered that we hid the king's crown under the biggest tree in the pomegranate daughter. pointing to the rug pattern. All we ask is that you not reveal our 40 faces to the king. Here are 100 gold coins to thank you in advance for your kindness. And they gave Bahar a bag with gold coins, and they snuck away. She has strong verbs and vivid adjectives, and we get to watch Bahar in this picture book, certainly for young children, elementary age children, that tackles that question, what happens when you're growing up and you see that people have wonderful things that you do not, and you want them. And so you buy into a whole system that says wealth at any cost. And how long does it take most of us to learn? Oh, it's not at any cost. That what renews us and makes us feel like life is worth living is art and nature and friendship and family. And Rasheen has Bahar come home to herself and the best that she can be. So let's thank Rasheen Kereye, wherever she is. Thank her. So, next.
In 30 Umragar Sugar and Milk, illustrated by Koa Lee and published by Running Press Kids, a young refugee feels lonely in her new country until she's comforted with a story. Her auntie tells her of a Persian leader whose people are forced to flee their native land. They sail to the shores of India, where the local king cries, "We have no room for you." But the wise leader cleverly convinces the king to change his mind. The story unfolds as a tale within a tale that is not only poignant, but timely. Thridi Umragar could not be with us today, but she sent some remarks that I'll share with you now. Thank you very much for this award, one that I will treasure. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how Sugar and Milk came to be. I grew up as a Parsi Zoroastrian child in India, belonging to a tiny ethno-religious minority. My ancestors came to India from Persia, which today would be mostly Iran, about a millennium ago. The story I tell in the book about the wise and witty Persian priest who led the expedition from Persia and the generous Hindu king who allowed them to stay is one I grew up hearing. You could say it's one of the origin stories about the Parsis in India. As a child, I was fascinated by the story because it's a story about quick thinking and wit and about kindness and generosity. In many ways, it's about the power of storytelling. When I came to America to go to grad school, this story also acted as a kind of roadmap for me as to how to conduct myself as a new and young immigrant. The story is also about a promise made by the Persian priest about making life sweeter for the new country in which the Parsis found themselves. I took that message to heart, that it was my obligation to fit in with the mores of my adopted country, America, and to work to better the lives of the people around me. When I became a published novelist in America, I used to end my book talks by telling this tale as a way of pointing out the importance of storytelling in the act of building community. The response of the audience was amazing. They would smile, nod, burst into applause. People loved that story and could relate to it no matter their stations in life. A few years ago, when the rhetoric against illegal immigrants in this country was particularly brutal and dehumanizing, I thought again about the ancient legend. And I realized that the people who needed this story most were children. I remembered how this story had affected my childhood. how it had served as a blueprint for my life. I wanted other children to be as moved by this story. Because it's more than the story of the refugees, it's equally the story of those who took the refugees in. In India, the gamble taken by that Hindu ruler 1,000 years ago has paid off handsomely. The Parsis have always been minuscule in numbers, but their influence and help in building modern India has been disproportionately large. They have been at the forefront of industry, science, the arts, and literature. Here are a few names you may recognize. The novelist, Rohinton Mistry, music conductor, Zubin Mehta, nuclear physicist, Homi Bhabha, industry titan, J.R.D. Tata. They are all Parsis. Thus, the ancient promise made by my ancestors has reverberated through the years. It is my hope that my little book will influence my young readers and teach them the power of softness, of kindness, of humility, and of the ability of words to transform lives. Thank you once again for this beautiful honor. And our next honoree is Jardine Nolan, author of Freedom Bird, illustrated by James E. Ransom and published by Paula Wiseman Books, a division of Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. Set in the days before the Civil War and in a narrative voice filled with warmth and wisdom, we meet an enslaved brother and sister who tend an injured bird in secret and follow it to freedom in this moving tale. Freedom Bird is a standout story that unflinchingly depicts both the horrors of slavery and the indomitable spirit of those enslaved. And the suspenseful plot and evocative prose beg to be shared through telling. It is my privilege now to present Jardine Nolan with the Anne Izard Storyteller's Choice Award for Freedom Bird.
Well, morning. I think it's still morning. It's so, yeah, it is. It's so good to see you all. Sing. Take joy, my dear, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Take joy, my dear, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Thank you. This is a most delightful occasion for the distinction given to my picture book, Freedom Bird. It is indeed an honor to be highly regarded with the prestigious Anne Izard Storyteller's Choice Award. It means that I'm in very good company with the likes of past recipients such as Julius Lester, Mem Fox, Jane Yolen, Catherine Patterson, and many more. I am filled with gladness in the knowledge that you have noticed my work. Thank you for choosing Freedom Bird. I learned I have some things in common with Anne Izard. The love of telling stories is one of them. And though I was also born in the South, I did not grow up there. My parents did, and they never forgot their farming and Southern ways. Both my parents told stories of one kind and another, and their stories were filled with parables and metaphor and such astounding tellings of their lives. Their stories informed me, and their teachings were embedded into a lifelong learning. Each have their distinctive storyteller's voice that I am tuned to and hear remnants and rich resonant sounds in some of the stories I have written. I send a loving thank you to both of them. There are so many others to thank. First and foremost, I give my thanks to my dear, beloved, wonderful editor. I call her wise woman, Paula Wiseman. Throughout the whole of my publishing career, Paula has believed in me and believed in my work. Thank you, Paula. And to James Ransom, is she there? Oh, oh, she's hello. And to James Ransom, who created the beautiful paintings. Nancy Gall, who some of you met, my excellent and very excellent agent, drove me here from her home in New Jersey. I must thank the art department at Simon & Schuster and their dedicated staff. And I'd like to mention and thank the beloved and much missed Virginia Hamilton, who helped me get started on my way. And thank you for all of us and for all that we do on behalf of children and the literature that serves them. Joseph Campbell defines the call to adventure. It's when the hero is confronted with an event or a conflict or a problem or a challenge that causes them to leave what they know for some greater good. Freedom Board is a story about an adventure that causes one to ponder. What would it be like to live life on our own terms? It is told through an escape journey. Stories define us. They shape the world we live in. Telling stories help us make meaning and sense of the world. There is power in storytelling, you know, telling a good story well. At its best, a story can help, instruct, soothe, and heal. And folklore is filled with myths and legends and story of the magic of flight. The metaphor of flight and flying is often used to set the imagination free. For African people enslaved here, it was the stories of flying away, thank you, Virginia Hamilton, that flying away that helped them to carry on and endure the misery. And that's what Freedom Bird is about. But before I get too far ahead of myself, it is best that I return to the very beginning and fetch what must not be lost or left behind. It was actually Big Jabe who started me on this story path. It is what became the seed story, a generational narrative of a family. It seems I have created a kind of a triptych, 3 stories that are meant to sit side by side each other, supporting the other story. Big Jabe, Freedom Bird, and Thunder Rose. Whereas Big Jabe may imply the escape journey to the north, Freedom is a broad-winged bird fills in the story of an escape to the west. It is specifically the background story of our story character, Millicent, and how she went west. She grew up to be the mother of Thunder Rose. And so now you know everything. I'd like to read an excerpt from Freedom Bird. It sometimes happens on account of what those who have come before us do with their lives. A pattern forms in the world, like the lines in a quilt that repeat over and over. And those actions continue to shape the lives of children and their posterity. Maybe it's that way with you and yours. Well, it was that way with John and Millicent. Now, you know, even before I tell you, there was nothing civil about that war. They should have called it what it was, a bad, bad war. But good can come out of bad. And something good came out of those backwoods one turbulent and thunderous night. The truth is, for the story I'm about to tell, the fight hadn't even started yet, but it was nigh on close and getting closer, which is what kept up all the shouting. Yet and still, those were some perilous times for folks who had it deep in the heart of them to just live free. Many escaped on the Underground Railroad, but now a way was made west, where the world was waiting, wide open and free. Like every other slave on Simon Plenty's plantation, John and Millicent suffered one hurt and heartbreak after another. But the worst of things was when, one by one, their parents, Samuel and Maggie, were sold away. I don't have to tell you the pain this could put on anyone, let alone a child. But long before this, Samuel and Maggie had sown the seeds of freedom in their children's minds and hearts. Back in the long ago days, Samuel and Maggie had told their children, when they wanted to and could remember how, our people could fly away to freedom as free and easy as any bird, because there is beauty and music in the flight of birds. Listen for the song. It is a song for the soul, a dance for the heart. The wings comb melodies from the air. Millicent and John had taken to those old tales of flying. In the brightness of day, the stories seemed like fancies concocted to soothe the battered brow. Yet and still, they carried the dream with them as they toiled the fields, until it began to weave and wrap itself around them like a quilt. It began to take root in their hearts and minds. Anyone living knows it's a want and a desire so deep to human feeling, so brave to human spirit, any human heart would cry out, go ahead, go ahead. Be free, be free. Remember, oh, remember how to make yourselves free. Maybe such a time will come for you, Samuel and Maggie had told their children. And then soon became the moment to set that dream free. You know, fate is a gleaming star that has its own way of pointing you out and shining down on you in the form of providence. And sometimes one fated star can shine down and cross with the shining of another. And when those stars meet, that can make for some powerful shining. Those not used to looking, expecting not to see, can be blinded by that light. Well, it was so this night. Those stars shone down on John and Millicent Wheeler, and what had been a suffering soon became a matter of moments and motions. Don't you know they get themselves free? Now listen for the song. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ears. Thank you. And before I take my seat, I just wanted to give you a little show and tell. This is my tribute to Toni Morrison. With the wonderful paintings of James Ransom. And I just love what he did here. And I can't tell you, I mean, it's just, so when I wrote this story, I'm not making sense. It's so beautiful. When I wrote the story, I heard it on 2 different tracks. you know, Tony did a lot of talking, like in her books, it was like a sermon. And I couldn't stop hearing that other's voice. And it was like an ancestor's voice. So that's how I wrote that. But it was fun for me. And the other thing I want to show is this is what I'm working on now. It's called Hope's Path to Glory. And it's the story of a family's journey on the overland trail to California during the gold rush. And so this would be the third in I have a journey to the Underground Railroad and then a journey north during the Civil War and this. So that's it. All right, well, thank you so much.
I'm next. Well, I'm a new member of this committee, and so I didn't get to choose the book that I would, oh, that's my favorite book. But somebody was very wise, and I don't know who found this book for me, but this book called Ghost. If you know anything about me at all, you know I love ghosts. My house has a ghost. I believe in ghosts. Well, sort of. When it's convenient or fun. But this is a beautiful book. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. And yes, it's supposed to be about the text, and the text is gorgeous. But this book called Ghost is a bunch of ghost stories that are suitable for, hold your breath, everybody, middle schoolers. How hard is it to find ghost stories that are both scary and also really good to tell to middle schoolers? They'll just look at you like, why are you telling me this story? And this is sort of dumb. I heard it when I was a kid. Or that's too scary. The teachers will come up and go, don't tell the story in the classroom. As you can see, I'm a storyteller, not a librarian. So I look very carefully for the things that somebody said are tripping on my tongue that just go out. And this is that book. And I think part of it might have been, I'm going to find my notes on this. Part of it is because Ghost, 13 haunting tales to tell, written by Illustratus, which is a collaborative. It looks like of 4 people: Blaise Hemingway, Jesse Refson. Those are the 2 authors, but they worked, from what I could see, very closely with 2 illustrators, Chris Sasaki and Jeffrey Turley. And in this family was the 5th person, the producer. All of them are in the film business out west. And it feels just like a script. It's beautiful to read, and the stories are well spoken and easy to speak. I'll read you a little of it. Oh, and it's published by Chronicle Books. It was in the mess hall that the boys first heard about Camp Champlain's groundskeeper, Old Man Blackwood. Blackwood lived in a 1-room cabin at the southern end of the camp property in the marshlands near the abandoned highway. The rumor was that Blackwood knew all the best ghost stories, the ones that were too scary or too gruesome for the counselors to tell to the young campers around the campfire, which is what I was speaking to. Too gruesome and too scary. Thomas was scared, and much too scared to try to find Blackwood's cabin alone in the dark. But when his bunkmate Skeeter announced he was going to make the long walk across the marsh that night, Thomas said, I'll come too. But the words had no longer left his lips. Then Thomas found himself consumed with dread. And this is the beginning. This is the prologue of a book that is full of just strange and the kind of stories that stick in your mind, and you go home with them at night. You go, oh, that's not too scary, until you go to sleep. Which the best thing I ever hear is when a story I've told has stayed. And children come up and tell me about it later. The worst is when their mothers or fathers tell me. The only true ghost stories. There are only 13 true ghost stories in the world. Blackwood, the camp caretaker, shifted, leaning forward in his chair, the candlelight reflected in his smoky eyes. Tonight, I'm going to tell you them all. While the other campers are asleep, the two boys sneak through the summer night to join the old caretaker in his house. There they hear the scary stories. Some of these stories are so terrifying they're probably best for teens who don't scare easily. Yes. And there is a jaw-dropping end of this collection. So like I said, I'm truly a fan of true ghost stories. Whenever I tell my own personal ghost stories, somebody will walk up and say, you know, you're not going to believe this. I can only tell it to you. No one else would believe me if I told them. They think I'm crazy, and then they'll tell you a true ghost story that happened to them. And I really love this. I don't know whether they're true or not, but I've chosen to believe them. And another thing that's so gorgeous in this, half of the stories are written in prose, and the other half are written in poetry. But the kind of poetry, again, that, like Shakespeare, don't know the phrase, slips trippingly off the thumb, off your tongue. And I just want to read you a little bit out of that. And then I'll say thank you, whoever chose this for me. I hope it was a group effort, because that means I am known in my new group. Here we are. An entire forest, still as the grave, is best left alone. Sadly, my thoughts took the opposite tack, and I pushed to keep us moving on. The fears gnawing at Fred's resolve to serve to make mine strong. But as we moved on, I did wonder aloud if the silence that seemed almost dead. Fred's voice from behind me sought to give answer as he clutched his bag, which was bright and red. And I will leave you with that, and hope you all get the book. That's mine. You know, I bought it from Amazon. It came in last night, and I dug right in because I couldn't help it. And after I was finished one, I read the next one, and I've read just about all. So I want to congratulate I would say the two authors and the two illustrators and their producer, known as Illustratus, and say thank you for giving a book to those of us who serve older children as well as younger children, with stories that frighten us in the night. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be able to present this next award for Mangoes, Mischief, and Tales of Friendship, Stories from India by Chitra Soundar. Chitra is an Indian-born British author and storyteller. She has published more than 30 books and is inspired by the rich heritage and epics of the folktales from India, as well as India's natural beauty. And this really comes through her storytelling. This delightful collection of Indian folktales showcases Prince Vira and his best friend Suku as they try to outsmart his father, the king's trickiest subjects. How should the case of the greedy merchant who wishes to charge people for the smells of the beautiful sweets be handled? Can they prove an innocent man cannot spread bad luck? How about, do you think if Prince Vira and Suku will be able to settle a dispute between a man and his neighbor to whom he sells a well, but not the water in it? Who does that? Read this book to find out. And last but not least, will they be able to solve the mystery of the jewels that turned into pickles? We are very thrilled to have Chitra here today with us via Zoom to accept this award.
Okay, there you go. Now I can unmute. Thank you very much for this honor. I'm absolutely delighted. As an oral storyteller myself, I'm so privileged to be given this honor, and I was so delighted because these stories I told orally before I put them down on paper. So for me, this was amazing. I grew up in India, in a very big joint family. So my grandparents lived with me, my uncles and aunts, everybody lived with me. My grandmother and her sister shared their knowledge of epics and stories, and even like the early movies they had seen in 1940s, they'll tell it to you as a story, as if it's happening right before your eyes. And I grew up in the oral storytelling tradition. My mom is a playwright, but she's an improv playwright, which means she made up a story on the spot and then gave us different roles and made us to go on stage and act them out. We were kind of hostage to that until we were 17. We were in an amateur drama club, so we used to go and act out different stories. And she turned 75 this week, and until before COVID, she was still going on stage and acting and doing different impressions and things like that. So as a family, we were always telling stories to each other, making up things. When I was growing up, my grandmother never used to tell me off. So every time I did something wrong or I was disappointed with something, she will kind of allude to a story. So for example, if I didn't try something and gave up after reading the book and say, oh, this is too hard, she'll say, oh, you are like the cat that doesn't drink milk. I'm like, what is a cat that doesn't drink milk? And then she'll tell you the story of the cat that doesn't drink milk. And then that got stuck in my head. So a lot of stories that she told me were things like this, were lessons that she taught me as we grew up, one at a time. I used to sit up on the kitchen counter while she cooked and listened, and she'll tell me stories while she cooked. So I learned cooking and I learned stories as a result of that. And I started cooking much earlier. So these stories are what we call trickster tales from India. So they come from the whole Indian subcontinent, but specifically there are 3 or 4 bodies of work which is all orally told. So in the north of India, there were stories called the Birbal stories, who was a minister in Emperor Akbar's court, and his house is still inside Akbar's palace, and all of that is still there in Delhi. And these stories evolved from there. And then there were South Indian equivalents of that, like Tenali Rama in Krishnadevaraya's court. And these stories then morphed. So everybody substituted the characters across the board. So we didn't know which story came from where at some point, and we learned all of those stories. So when I wanted to write this book, I reimagined the characters myself. So I borrowed from the oral tradition of reimagining, and I kept the spine of the story and put them into different characters and different settings. And the two boys kind of solve the problems that these old men and ministers were solving in, say, the 14th or the 15th century. So that's the kind of premise to these stories. I tell these stories in schools quite a lot. And I always, because they are stories about right and wrong, they're stories about inequality and fairness, I always tell the story, stop before I do the ending, and the class debates with me about which is the right answer, what could be the judgment that's coming through, and then we'll finish the story. And that creates so much discussion among young children about what's the right thing to do. And that's kind of motivates me to tell more of these stories. I'm going to read from a little from the beginning and then a little from one of my favorite stories. Long ago in a faraway land, King Bhima ruled a small kingdom surrounded by the magnificent hills of Himtuk. King Bhima was a kind and just ruler. Every day he held court at the palace. Rich or poor, tall or short, man or woman, anyone could walk in with a problem. The king would always find a way to solve it. The king lived with his wife and son in a red stone palace. Prince Veera was 10 years old, but he didn't go to school. The school came to him. His teachers lived in the palace and taught him mathematics, science, economics, and many languages, including Persian, Mandarin, and Latin. The prince had to master archery, horseback riding, and swimming. Sons of ministers and students with special scholarships came to the palace to study with him. If anyone could compete with Prince Veera, it was Suku, the farmer's son. Suku had won a scholarship to study with the prince. He was a good match for Veera and could best him in wrestling and fencing. He rode horses as well as Veera too. The two boys became good friends. They ate together, studied together, and played in the courtyard together. When they were let out early from classes, the boys liked to hide behind the large golden curtains and peep into the king's court. It was always filled with people who had problems. 3 days after harvest, Suku came to the palace to see Prince Veera. He brought fresh corn, bunches of groundnuts, and tender coconut water to drink. "Do you want to go to the woods?" Prince Veera asked. "We can check mongoose holes for snakes and chase deer and bison." "After a week of harvest, I don't want to be anywhere near plants and trees," said Suku. "Can we sneak into the court and see what's going on?" Much later, they set up their own court, and this happens. I'll read a little bit from one of my favorite stories. This story my grandmother told me as a little girl. I used to listen to this story, and it's super fun to tell as a storyteller as well. Suku's aunt Chandra was a washerwoman. While she worked, she sang songs about the forests and the trees, the rivers and the bees. People in the village often stopped outside her house to listen. Like all washerwomen, she had a donkey. The donkey carried her load to and from the river and sang with her whenever it pleased. But of course, the donkey's braying was not sweet like Chandra's voice. Like any other donkey's, its braying was loud and harsh. One evening, Suku saw his Aunt Chandra in the market. "Hello, Aunt Chandra," said Suku. "How are you today?" Same old, said Chandra. "Every day I get into a fight with the porter next door." "Why?" "The porter gets upset about everything I do. You beat your clothes too loudly," he says. "Your donkey brays too loudly. Your singing is horrible." "But you sing beautifully," said Suku. "That man must have no taste." "Mark my words, nephew," said Chandra. "One day that porter is going to bring lots of trouble and drop it on my doorstep." "I hope that doesn't happen," said Suku. "But if it does, I'll be there to help you." And the story, she does get into trouble, and the two boys help her to kind of take revenge on the porter in a very gentle way. and the donkeys right through. And when I'm telling this story in the classroom, we all go hee-haw all the time, which is so much fun, especially when you're telling with 8 and 9-year-olds. It's a lot of fun. So thank you, everybody. I'm so delighted to have got this honor. And I wanted to share you the next book in the series that just come out in the US. It came out in the UK last year. It's called A Sliver of Moon and a Shard of Truth. Thank you.
It is my great pleasure to recognize Joe Fernahoe, the author and illustrator of The Crow and the Peacock. This book, a treasure for storytellers, was published by Erdman's Books for Young Readers, and it's Joe's debut picture book. In this delightful story, Crow envies the song of Dove. Dove envies Nightingale. And this goes on until Crow discovers that Peacock envies the crows because crows fly free. A wonderful story about appreciating one's own talents and one's own life. Jo was educated largely in illustration. She has a master's in illustrating books for children from the Cambridge School of Art, where she is currently, I believe, a lecturer in book illustration. And I read that she said that she wished she had more classes in how to write creatively. She said that she loves to write, but she finds it easier to illustrate. So I hope that presenting her with this award for the wonderful text of her book will embolden her not only to illustrate as she does so well, but to go on writing as she does beautifully. Jo has graciously joined us from across the Atlantic Ocean, where she lives in England, and it is my great pleasure to present Jo Fernahoe.
Thank you very much. What a great introduction. Yes, as you just said, I've kind of approached the storytelling in an illustration fashion. So everything I do starts more visually than the actual kind of written work. I kind of visualize it first and then kind of come onto it. I'm going to try and do something brave and share my screen and just take you through some kind of images, which is my best way of storytelling. And I don't know whether this will work, so bear with me. No, I can't. No, can I not? No, okay. I don't think it will work. Not sure. Here we go. Here we go. So I hope you can all see this. If I just put this into slideshow. Can you see that? Thumbs up. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So just really quickly, my whole life has been about children's stories and illustration. This is my mother's foray into children's illustration in the 60s, before I was born, and she created the illustrations for this lovely little girl called Poppet. So, oops, sorry, I'm just whizzing along. I told you this would be a nightmare. Back to it. So yes, so she was my main inspiration, and my house, it was a very kind of fairy tale house. It was always full of different illustrations and paint, and it was, you know, a wonderful upbringing. So she was my main kind of inspiration. I then kind of started exploring. I went on to the MA in Cambridge School of Art. And started kind of exploring mark making. So often I will create these kind of marks which with paint that I'll just press down on or scribble. And then when I'm kind of illustrating stories, I'll bring these in and see if they can become backgrounds. So kind of, you know, I've got the cold colours here and the warm colours here. So the warm colours is turned into a little lake that the swan in my book actually swims on with Crow. So it's all kind of very exploratory mark making that I try and explore. Crow existed before I kind of found the fable, The Crow and the Peacock. On my MA, I'd written a story which I struggled with because I go on too much, I blab. But it was about a naughty fox that liked to kind of rummage around in the garbage and find lots of different things which he could then go off and be naughty with. And Crow popped up in this story, as you can see, just in amongst the rubbish bags. I thought it was quite a nice little Easter egg because his tail is a little bit like the rubbish bags. Then I created the sun. The sun for me was the embodiment of what I felt children's stories was all about for me visually. It was full of colour and it was full of happiness, and this is where I kind of wanted to take it. Then I stumbled on the fable, The Crow and the Peacock, and with it, I kind of created the book, and then my agents took it to the Bologna Book Fair, where in England, Oxford University Press kind of snapped it up, and we worked on it for about another year. So in the making, it was quite a long time until it actually realised its publishing. The editor and I in the UK worked on it, and we decided that it needed a happier ending than it did have. So we kind of constructed, as Crows are extremely intelligent, we constructed that Crow finally released Peacock from his cage to give it a little bit of a lighter ending than just leaving Peacock in his cage. So yeah, so far Crow and the Peacock has been, it's been translated into a number of languages now, and is still doing well. He's with Erdman Young Readers in America, and they are really, really brilliant publishers that have done a lot to kind of support the book and get it out there. And so yes, yeah, so it's been a wonderful journey. I think if I can, I'm not going to read it myself, but for me the story needs to go with the illustrations because that's how I see things. So I'm going to just see if I can play this now, if we can hear it. Hi guys. Oops. The Crow and the Peacock. There once was a crow who lived in the woods. Crow was happy with his life and never wanted for anything until one day Crow saw a dove. She was cooing softly from her nest. That bird is so beautiful and her cooing is so soothing, thought Crow. Her bright feathers make mine seem so dull. Who would want to listen to my loud caw, caw? Crow flew up to the dove and said, "You're so beautiful, you must be the happiest bird alive." I thought I was happy, said Dove, until I heard nightingales sing. The singing is so magnificent, it makes my cooing sound so plain. Nightingale must be the happiest bird in the world. That night, Crow went to hear Nightingale's beautiful song. Your singing is so magnificent, said Crow. You must be the happiest bird alive. I thought I was happy, said Nightingale, until I met Cockerel. Every morning his call is heard across the land, yet my song is heard by only a few in the night. Cockerel must be the happiest bird in the world. The next morning, Crow flew to the farm to meet Cockerel. Doo-doo-doo. Your call is so famous, said Crow. You must be the happiest bird alive. I thought I was happy, said Cockerel, until I met Swan. Swan spends all day swimming on the cool river while I must live on this dusty and hot farm. Swan must be the happiest bird in the world. Crow flew to the river to see Swan. "Your river is a beautiful place to live," said Crow. "You must be the happiest bird alive." "I thought I was happy," said Swan, "but then I met Peacock. Peacock wears the crown of a majestic king and his feathers sparkle like jewels. Next to him, I'm so ordinary. Peacock must be the happiest bird in the world." Crow couldn't wait to meet Peacock. First, he had trouble seeing over the huge crowd that had gathered around. But when the crowd finally left, Crow hopped over to take a closer look. "Ooh, beautiful," said the crowd. "Oh, wow, you truly are the king of birds. You must be the happiest bird alive." Peacock sighed and said, "I was once happy. I used to call to the monsoons from high on my tree. But then the emperor put me in a cage so his people could admire my beauty." Peacock looks at the sky. "Every day I see crows flying free, and all I want to be is a crow. I think you, Crow, must be the happiest bird alive." Crow flew back to the woods, feeling content with his dark feathers and real. He knew for certain that he was happy with his life, and now all he wanted was to. Oh, that finished a bit. Sorry. Sorry. So all he wanted to be was happy. So basically, the story resonated with me mainly for kind of helping to get children to understand to be happy with themselves. You know, my daughter was kind of young, kind of 8, 9, entering her kind of early teens, you know, as the book was progressing, and with social media and all the pressure that young children are under nowadays, I thought that kind of message was like really important to kind of try and embed in the younger years, which appealed to me, to try and, you know, help get that message out and help them kind of really come to terms with, you know, they are all great and we are all different and we all want to be something that we're not sometimes, but kind of just trying to be happy with who we are. I think that the whole fable just resonated with me, and the illustrations, you know, just grew naturally for that story. I kind of envisaged it in my head as it was, you know, as I was kind of reading it. So yeah, so sorry about that kind of sharing and slideshow. It was a bit clunky, but I got there in the end. But yes, yeah, that's me really. Thank you very much for the beautiful award. It's wonderful. And that's it. Thank you.
Our next award winner is Hannah Cha, writer and illustrator of Tiny Feet Between the Mountains. Also a debut book, written, published just 2 years after she graduated from the Rhode Island School for Design. Hannah spent her childhood in Korea and in America, which makes her an ideal interpreter of the Korean myths of powerful tigers. In this wonderful book, a small Korean girl is the only one in her community brave enough to face down the spirit tiger and to save the tiger who chased the sun and accidentally swallowed it. This story is based on Korean mythology about tigers, and it is a story which is as beautifully written as it is illustrated. It is a great joy to introduce Hannah Cha.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. It means a lot to be recognized, and I wish I could be there to celebrate in person, but I'm also so happy to be at the very least present through Zoom. Like you said, Tiny Feet Between the Mountain is my very first book that I wrote and illustrated. And it took inspiration from my favorite Korean fable, and it's the tale about the sun and moon, where it's a story about a brother and sister outsmarting a tiger who's trying to eat them. And at the end, they prevail and they become the sun and moon. This story is a love letter to all the stories and legends that younger me voraciously read. I grew up in the States. I was born in the States, and I only lived in Korea for 5 years, but my mom and father really made sure to keep me attached to my roots, always spoke to me in Korean, and then I have that fascination. But it then ended up as a conflict between my two identities. And I think as a result, like you said before, like a story, you just keep on trying to look for the otherness or what you don't have. And also this book is a celebration for the love for Korean tigers, and is also a mourning of their extinction and a tribute to my Korean heritage. For this book, I actually went to Korea to learn minhwa, which is a Korean traditional way of painting with a calligraphy brush and with powdered paints. So I tried to incorporate that with those techniques, but I actually digitally painted the book itself. Writing this book really helped me retrace my roots, but also this book helped me be honest to myself, helped me leaning into the familiarity and daunting of new beginnings. The story came to me when I was in my most turbulent state during school, but it was the time where I felt ever so small while everything else felt ever so big. But it's very interesting how naturally that story comes to you, and then you just are compelled to write that story and hoping to share, and maybe also it's a story that I wish the little me could also have read. And also, unbeknownst to me, and I'm sure many of us, this past years really did its very best to make us feel very small. But I'm again so happy to celebrate this with you. And if anything, this past year just taught me how writing and illustrating a book and have just anyone read it is already an honor and a joy. I could really go on, but I want to end with reading the latter half of my book of when Soen and Tiger finally sees the glimmer of a new day, and along with the author note at the end. Losing her footing, Soen began to fall, but the tiger caught her small body in his large paw. His eyes twinkling like stars, he roared with delight. "I can't believe it! You did it! Thank you for your help. Come, let me bring you home." I love this spread though. I don't know if it can do justice through the screen. Down in the village, Soen could see the people scrambling and yelling with fear at the sight of the spirit tiger. They suddenly looked very tiny. Soen climbed up the tiger and beckoned the villagers forward. One by one, they came out and listened to Soen's tale. When she was finished, Soen introduced the villagers to the spirit tiger. Celebration and cheering erupted as the spirit tiger kissed Soen on the head. He bestowed a blessing on her in the village before returning to the mountains and forest. From that day forward, the villagers were kinder towards Soen, and she was known as the greatest of them all. In the back, I wrote an author's note. Long ago in Korea, tiger used to roam freely between the mountains and villages. People would fear the tigers, but at the same time, they saw tigers as a symbol of respect, strength, and dignity. Tigers constantly appeared in Korean stories and images, sometimes as deities, sometimes as threats. Regardless of their role, tigers always offered a moral and guided the Korean people. Many Koreans believed that their country was shaped like a tiger and that their spirit animals were tigers. Because of colonization, tigers are now extinct in Korea, but their spirit lives on in their strengths of the Korean people. Thank you again for presenting this platform so we can just celebrate, and also for me to just hear everyone's beautiful words. Yes, thank you so much.
Leave it to a former zookeeper, dolphin trainer, firefighter, and teacher to write a rousing story about the origins of what the British called the War of American Independence. With engaging humor, verve, and acumen, Sarah Jane Marsh illuminates how somber, liberty-obsessed Samuel Adams and wealthy party lover John Hancock developed an improbable relationship that helped incite that war of independence. When I read Most Wanted, the revolutionary partnership of John Hancock and Samuel Adams aloud to an American history professor, my husband, he laughed out loud and noted that even he learned new facts. Marsh's story resonates with today's critical issues and uncertain times. It will leave its audiences with essential questions about our own lives. Just how many times do we need to learn the same lesson about preserving our democracy? What are the characteristics of a patriot? How do we talk civilly to each other across issues that divide us? Miss Marsh does answer firmly the current question of how to teach history in these contentious times and how important it is. With facts, not alternative facts. Our future depends on these truths that were once held to be self-evident. Please welcome our revolutionary author, Sarah Jane Marsh. Right on.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for having me. I am very delighted to receive this award. This is my second book published, and it is my second book on the American Revolution. And as I was delving into this topic, I was very intrigued by the notorious troublemakers, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Here is a song that the British soldiers would sing to the tune of Yankee Doodle during the American Revolutionary War. Here's one line. As for their king, John Hancock, and Adams, if they're taken, their heads for signs shall hang on high upon that hill called Beacon. So these two troublemakers were very well known at the time and somewhat have faded over time. And so I wanted to tell a little bit more of their story. And initially, I wanted to focus on just one day of American history. How hard could that be? And this would be the 24 hours before the fighting at Lexington and Concord, when there were about 26 people inside and outside one home in Lexington trying to prevent Hancock and Adams from being arrested by the British soldiers marching their way. And at the time, I was inspired by none other than a dear author illustrator that perhaps we all know, Richard Scarry. And I could see it. I could see this story. I would tell American history in a different way, a very child-friendly way, maybe like a counting story leading up to these 26 people crammed in the house. And so I spent a year researching and crafting this story. And I sent it to my literary agent, who responded with a rather long email highlighting, as she said, number of reasons why the story wasn't quite working. I'll read you a few of them because I think we all can take heart. And sometimes, just the path to our finding that story within. So some of the issues with my draft included the voice, the humor. It wasn't satisfying enough. It was very narrative, very telly, too many characters. The mayhem is too unmanageable. And here's my favorite. The mix of humor and carnage is kind of tough in a picture book. But at the end, she asked me a question. What if you just focused on Hancock and Adams? What if the focus is more on the differences in their characters and how they interacted? Well, this sent me on another journey, another year spent researching and writing a story that would expand from one day to 10 years of American history, told through the lens of this odd couple relationship between Hancock and Adams. And in the process of telling this story, I did see history repeating itself in many ways, of which I talk about in my author's note. But what I wanted to share today also is just the challenge of making this history engaging for children and to find my own voice as a storyteller. So I wanted to share a little bit of the center of the story. When royal office, or let me start a little earlier, and the daring disobedience of John Hancock was becoming the inspiring image of a defiant America. When royal officers tried to inspect his ship Lydia, Hancock tossed them off. When they tried to inspect his ship Liberty, Hancock's captain locked them in the hold. And when the Royal Navy seized the Liberty as punishment, an angry crowd rioted through Boston in Hancock's defense. Hancock was, quote, an idol of the mob, wailed the officers. Together, Hancock and Adams were becoming a royal pain. Finally, when Britain refused to remove a tax on tea, Hancock and Adams held a town meeting with 5,000 of their angriest friends. This meeting can do nothing more, announced Adams. Let every man do what is right, hollered Hancock. The next morning, over 92,000 pounds of fine British tea were found floating in Boston Harbor. Across the ocean in London, King George was not amused. His American colonies were behaving very badly. They had ignored his laws, terrorized his tax collectors, harassed his soldiers, boycotted his trade, and sent a flurry of disobedient letters into his royal lap. And now they had tossed his tea. Punish Hancock and Adams, cried Parliament. Quote, the town of Boston ought to be knocked about their ears and destroyed. Parliament ordered Boston Harbor closed. Massachusetts town meetings restricted. The Massachusetts colonial government revoked. And to enforce the king's law, they marched more soldiers into the streets of Boston under the command of General Thomas Gage, the new royal governor of Massachusetts. there would be no more monkey business in Boston. So during the process of writing this, again and again, I mean, even just reading this to you right now and reflecting back on when people in power didn't like the way that people were behaving and how they tried to change the laws to preserve that power. History, we repeat and repeat. There are so many lessons that we still are learning, haven't learned from our history as a nation. And so it is fascinating as a storyteller to do this research and share it with children. I also am so thankful to, I would like to say a real thanks to my agent, my very wise agent, Karen Wiseman, who really helped draw this story out of me. I would like to thank my editor, Rotem Moskovich, who believed in this story and even allowed it to be an 80-page picture book, which is unheard of. And also, I'm still surprised how many exclamation marks she let me put into this manuscript. I'm still a little surprised. Like, I think they're not going to keep this in. I'm going to have to edit it out. And even that last line, there would be no more monkey business in Boston. After this was published, I couldn't remember whether that had gotten edited out or not, because sometimes as a storyteller, a little sassy aside might come in. And did it really make it into the manuscript? Yes, it did. So for me, I hope those things help the student that's sitting in the back row that can't see the photos, you know, stay engaged with this story and maybe want to learn more. So yes, I use sass, I use humor in my writing because these are really important issues and I want kids to be interested and to maybe learn a little bit more. So if this can be a gateway book, like many books have been to me, then I will be so happy. I want to thank Ed Fotheringham for his incredible photos because he expanded the story beyond just Hancock and Adams to the thousands of people that were involved and the folks also that didn't have a voice at the time. So we really tried to think a lot about the visuals in this book as well. But mostly I want to thank you all just for your role in supporting and celebrating the power of storytelling in our lives. So thank you.
What a glorious way to spend a Saturday morning. I mean, authors near and far, stories, storytellers, books, illustrations, and words. Such wonderful words that carry so much meaning. It is my pleasure to give the award, the Anne Izard Storyteller's Choice Award to Patricia Polacco for the bravest man in the world. For many of us, Patricia Polacco is no stranger. Her books grace my shelves, as I'm sure they do many of yours, as touchstones. She takes bits and pieces of her life, jumps into history, weaves it all together with imagination to create stories that talk about what we have in common, to talk about the heroic in the ordinary, and to show us how our better angels will allow us to rise above the trials and tribulations of our lives. This book does that. The opening is a little boy who doesn't want to have to practice the piano. And I immediately dove into that story because I recall saying those very words. And then enters this fictional grandfather who plays the first violin in the orchestra to explain a little something about himself and music and about the real life Wallace Hartley who stood on the deck of the Titanic as it sank into the sea, playing his violin and the song Nearer, My God, to Thee, to calm those who were about to plunge into the waters. An amazing story. I do have to add an aside. I have already been to the table at the back, brought out my credit card, purchased many of the books that are here, and I am going back to purchase more. Patricia could not be here with us today. Paula Wiseman, this book, by the way, is a Paula Wiseman book, another one published by the division of Simon & Schuster for young readers. Nice to see your face again, Paula. So Patricia has sent these remarks, which I am honored to read. Thank you for this honor. I was born to a family of storytellers. Growing up, I would curl up by the fireplace, listening to family stories of the past and our history. History tells us so much about the present. And though the Titanic story is over 100 years old, it still lives on in all of us. The inspiring story of Wallace Hartley is not as well known and has special meaning today about acting for the greater good. Hartley, in many ways, was the bravest man in the world. In this book, I tell my invented story of a grandfather sharing Hartley's story with his grandson one day when the boy did not want to practice the piano. Jonathan's grandfather was an orphan from Ireland who stowed away on the Titanic, and Wallace Hartley, the bandmaster on the Titanic, took the boy under his wing. On the tragic evening of April 14th, 1912, when the Titanic struck an iceberg, Hartley led the orchestra in Nearer, My God, to Thee to help keep the passengers calm. Jonathan's grandfather, my invented character, and true survivors recounted that he played to the end. We all tell stories. Stories sustain us. And I hope this book will inspire and inform readers of the heroic act of Wallace Hartley. I want to thank you for this storytelling award and for all the work you and Anne Izard did in her years in Westchester for children and reading. I am grateful. And I think we are all grateful to Patricia and Paul.
How many of you, committee, you're not allowed to respond. How many of you have heard of Mary Walker? I figured that. I hadn't heard of her either. Hers is a story, though, that deserves to be told and deserves to be known. And I know that I am richer for having heard of it and learned of it by our next author, Rita Lorraine Hubbard, and her book, The Oldest Student. Mary Walker wanted to read, wanted to learn to read, but a prodigious amount of challenges in her life had kept her from doing so. Not the least of which was being enslaved at the beginning of her life. But after the end of the Civil War, the difficulties of life, of raising a family, of earning a living, of caring for elderly parents and then elderly husband and elderly self and eventually elderly children just got in the way. And it wasn't until she was 115 when she finally got to learn to read. And I'm going to share a bit of the story. Mary had heard about a new reading class held in her building. She pursed her lips No more waiting, she decided. Time to learn. Out of her apartment, into an elevator, and down to the lobby she went. When the elevator doors sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbor walked up to her. "That's a reading class, Miss Mary. Can I help you over?" Mary shook her head. Then she gripped her cane, lifted her chin, and walked straight toward that sign. For the next year and more, Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy. After all, she was the oldest student in the class and probably in the entire country. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. And of course she did. And she was celebrated as the oldest student. Luckily, she got to enjoy that skill of reading for quite a while longer. She had received many gifts over the years. She was taken up in a plane even. She said it was a lot like riding in a horse and buggy. But she always enjoyed that ability now to read. And every birthday, people would always ask her to read. And when she was finished, she would gently close her book and say, "You're never too old to learn." She lived to be 121 years old. Now, Rita was not able to join us today. She is enjoying a well-deserved vacation in Florida right now, so we hope you're enjoying the sunshine. But she did send along some remarks, which I'm very pleased to read. Dear Anne Izard Award Committee, John C. Hart Library, and any and everyone attending the ceremony. First, thank you so much for choosing The Oldest Student as one of the books you will celebrate during the awards ceremony. Second, congratulations to all the other authors whose books are being recognized. And third, I apologize that I could not be here in person. I was a fifth grader when I first heard about Mary Walker. My teacher took our class on a field trip to the now defunct Mary Walker Museum. And there I learned about an enslaved girl freed by the Emancipation Proclamation at age 15, but who did not learn to read until the age of 116. Although I was much too young to write a book back then, I never forgot Mary's story and always wondered what took her so long to learn to read. Years later, I stumbled across Mary's name and remembered her amazing achievement at age 116. I had grown up hearing the old saying, everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. But I found with Mary's story and many other stories that I had stumbled upon that this saying wasn't always true. It soon became my mantra to help unsung heroes who had achieved something or overcame some colossal obstacle to get their 15 minutes of fame. That's what I did for Mary. I told her story so that she could have her 15 minutes. I do want to mention that you never know when you put something out into the world whether it will be well received. But in the case of The Oldest Student, I could not have asked for a better reception. Now, each time I choose a subject to write about, I write with the hope that this will help them get their 15 minutes of fame. Thank you again for your thoughtfulness and generosity in choosing The Oldest Student for the Anne Izard Award. I will always cherish it. And so I hope all of our stories and all of your stories get their 15 minutes of fame. Thank you.
Hello, our last teller is no stranger. She is now living in Northern Ireland where she was born, but she only moved back there a few years ago. For several years, she lived right here in Connecticut. She worked in the Chappaqua Library, and then she was a school librarian at Brunswick School in Greenwich. And during that entire time that she was here with us in the Northeast, Mary Ann McShane became a well-loved storyteller, telling soul-inspiring stories of old Ireland. And one of her favorite ones, and one of our favorite ones, was about a boy who was rescued from the sea by a mermaid. And Mary Ann then decided to turn this story, this oral story, into a book. And we were privileged to witness her editing process as she turned this already very good story into an even better book that is now an award winner. So I am pleased to introduce Mary Ann McShane, the author of Ronan and the Mermaid, A Tale of Old Ireland. Mary Ann.
So thank you very much, Judy, and thank you everybody, all my friends and colleagues and people new that I've just met today for the first time. This award is so special to me because I've always loved stories. I've been a storyteller for many years and a children's librarian. And some of the authors speaking today have talked about how stories have helped being in a new land. And when I moved to the States in my late 20s, I was very homesick. But the Irish stories were a way of me keeping my home with me and my past with me. And then I was delighted to find out how other people loved Irish stories over there. So there was always an audience, and I hadn't realized just how rich the vein of Irish stories was considered in other parts of the world. And all my years as a children's librarian, sometimes people would come in the library and say, well, do you not think you would write a story? And I said, no, I don't think I could write a story. I thought I have a good sense of what makes a good story. I can sense a real good story for children, but I don't think I'd write one. And then what happened was one day when I was far away in Connecticut, about 3,000 miles from Bangor, the town where I grew up and where I live now, I came across a reference in a book of mythology that Congal, who was a saint who founded our town in the 6th century, had baptized a mermaid. Now, this was news to me. My school was called St. Congal's. We have 2 or 3 churches in town called St. Congal's, but I had never, ever heard of this fact, this legend. And so I made it my business when I went home to see what I could find out. And very little was known. The monks, some 100 years later, had recorded this in the annals. Very briefly, it just said, Congal christened a mermaid. And so I thought, well, if there's very little about it, that gives me leeway to add a little bit more and make up the story. And one of the best pieces of advice that I was ever given was, write the story you want to read. And I wanted this to be a story that children in Bangor today, and anybody in Bangor and beyond Bangor, could rejoice in the fact that we had a mermaid connected with our town. And so it's sort of come full circle because just this past week I've been visiting schools. And in one of the primary schools, they're using Ronan and the Mermaid as their literacy text, connecting it with their history, learning history of the town. So Ronan's story, or the mermaid story, is not going to be forgotten. So I thought what I'd like to do, I know we're running out of time here, a little bit over time. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit of the beginning of the story of Ronan and the Mermaid. Long ago in Ireland, when fairy folk dwelt in the hills and merfolk swam in the seas, saints and holy men lived in little beehive huts dotted along lonely shores. And these huts of wattle and thatch were the first abbeys. Now the ancient abbey of Bangor lay nestled by the edge of the Irish Sea, and there the monks worked and prayed, their companions the seagulls flying in the wind, or the seals basking on the rocks. And one day, after a terrible storm, Brother Declan was searching for driftwood along the shore when he came across a circle of seals keening softly on the sands. In their midst lay a young boy, wisps of seaweed tangled in his hair and his eyes closed tight. He was wrapped in a shawl woven from seagrass, and a silver ring glistened in his outstretched hand. Well, Declan looked up the beach and down, but there was no one in sight. And he gazed over the water, and he glimpsed a flash of gold by the grey rocks. The old monk rubbed his eyes and looked again, but saw only white foam and swirling waves. The lines in his forehead deepened as he remembered the old tales of mermaids and seal people. He picked the boy up in his arms, tucked the ring in the pocket of his cloak, and hurried back to the abbey. I found him with the seals, he told the curious monks, and saying no more, he laid the boy in a bed of rushes and wrapped the shawl around him. Well, Brother Finbar kindled the hearth fire and placed a basin of milk over it to warm. And Brother Kevin unlaced his pouch of healing herbs and sprinkled a few onto the frothy white bubbles. And the little hut warmed with the scent of sage and rosemary. And Abbot Comgall himself came, dipped his fingers in a cup of holy water, and blessed the boy. And then Declan took a spoonful of milk and he blew on it first to cool it, and he held it to the boy's lips. And Ronan sipped, and with the first sip, he opened his eyes. With the second sip, the color came back to his cheeks, and with the third sip, he sat up and he looked all around as if he didn't know where he was, and as if he was searching for something. And then he fell back on the rushes with a sigh. Declan put his hand in his pocket and held out the ring. The boy clasped it, took it in his hands and turned it over and over, and he wondered at the tiny L engraved on the inside. "She gave it to me," he said, "the lady with the golden hair." And he told him then that his name was Ronan, and that he'd been out fishing with his father when the storm blew in. We turned our boat and tried to get back to shore, but the waves were too strong, too rough, and the boat capsized. We were tossed out into the water. And my father could hold me no longer, and I was swept from his arms. But then the lady came. At first I thought it was a big fish, but her hair was long and golden, and she sang to me till we reached the shore. Ronan's eyes closed, and his voice grew softer. She put the ring into my hand and told me that one day I would help her. Well, Brother Kevin and Brother Finbar looked at each other and shook their heads, for they thought surely this was a fever talking. But Brother Declan was not so sure. He remembered the old tales of mermaids, and he remembered that flash of gold by the rocks. But he kept his thoughts to himself. "Let the boy sleep," he told the monks. "He's feverish and needs rest." And Ronan didn't wake until the moon rose and sank and the sun rose once more. But day by day, he recovered his strength. Brother Finbar would bring him a speckled egg every morning for nourishment, and Brother Kevin strewed herbs under his pillow to ease the fever. And Brother Declan took that silver ring, threaded it on a piece of linen, and tied it around the boy's neck for safekeeping. And in the evenings, Brother Declan would sit by Ronan's bed while the candle burned low, and he would tell him all the old stories. He told him about the seal people who can shed their skins on full moon nights and take on human shape. And he told him about Liban, the princess turned into a mermaid when a great lake flooded her home and drowned all who lived there. No one has ever seen her, the old monk said, but her singing has entered many a dream on quiet, moonlit nights. And Ronan's fingers strayed to that silver ring, for in his heart, he knew it was Liban who had saved him. So that's the start of Ronan and the Mermaid, and Ronan does get a chance to do something for her. So thank you.
Wow. What else am I supposed to say but wow? Thank you, Marianne. Marianne joined us from Ireland this morning. We're so grateful. We're so grateful to everyone who was here today, near and far, from Europe, from around North America, to all of you here in our room. The Anne Izard Awards, excuse me, is an ongoing process. We have started our newest round, the 16th awards. Anyone who's got a story that they think that we should hear, that maybe we don't know, can find us. We're available on the Westchester Library Association's website. I am available at this library. I want to thank the Westchester Library System, the Westchester Library Association, the Friends of the Heart Library, the Starbucks of Yorktown, Yvonne Check, the director of the building, and her wonderful staff for all that they did and put up with me running around trying to pull this off yesterday and today. And all of you. I am a storyteller, and storyteller with no audience is just no fun. Thank you all. I'm so pleased you have been able to be a part of our event today. It means a lot to all of us. And to my committee, if I could ask you to stand up, get up, 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 up. Couldn't ask for a better group of people. And when we're annoying. Except when you're annoying, right? And way in the back, I'm going to ask everybody to applaud for Krishna. Krishna is here from the Westchester Library System and has been running around helping us with all of our tech today. So without Krishna, I don't know who you would have heard and whose names would have been on the screen. So he jumped in to play another member of the Anne Izard committee.
And a special thank you to Jen from the Pleasantville Books.
Yes, the books are here. We have some signed book plates from some of our authors. Jen is here in the back. If you're interested in any of the titles, she can certainly help you with that. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.